After the immediate worldwide success of Dark Side of the Moon and the lengthy tour that followed its release, Pink Floyd's album Harvest Records wanted another chart-topping moneymaker, and fast. But when the Dark Side tour ended in June of 1973, the band took a break and went their own ways for 4 months. By the time the members of Pink Floyd reconvened at Abbey Road Studios to record their next album, they realized they had no idea what to record next. How does a band top itself after they made one of the best-selling albums of all time? If the band is Pink Floyd, they record an experimental concept piece without the use of any musical instruments. Today we're going to take a closer look at Household Items, Pink Floyd's lost album, that ended up being too weird, even for them. But before we get started, subscribe to the channel Weird History, leave a comment, and let us know what rock oddities you would like us to cover next. After 8 years, 7 albums, and the loss of their lead singer and principal songwriter in Syd Barrett, Pink Floyd had finally found mainstream success when they released Dark Side of the Moon on March 1st, 1973. While the album only held the #1 spot in the US Billboard charts for a week, it remained on the charts for 741 weeks, from 1973 to 1988. It would also go on to be one of the best-selling albums of all time, with over 15 million copies sold, and that was only in the US. That was the good news. The bad news is that the people at Pink Floyd's record label were pressuring them to get back into the studio and follow up Dark Side with an album just as successful, preferably even better. Pink Floyd, a band that never ranked higher on the Billboard charts than number 46, with 1972's Obscured by Clouds, suddenly found themselves very rich and very famous. At the time, they were big, maybe more so than the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, and The Who, and Pink Floyd just didn't know how to handle it. Bassist Roger Waters even called the success of Dark Side the end of the road. Pink Floyd wanted to deliver an album that was just as innovative as Dark Side, and in search of an idea, they decided to return to their experimental roots. After making the most accessible and mainstream album of their career in Dark Side, which subsequently produced an intimidating case of writer's block, Pink Floyd decided to record their follow-up album with no conventional instruments at all. No guitars, no bass, no drums, no synths. Instead, they'd use everyday items you might find around the house, like aerosol spray cans, forks, and wine glasses. But the band knew there was a chance the album could become a novelty, so they paid great attention to detail in producing quality tones from these found objects. Roger Waters allegedly spent days getting a perfect bass-like sound out of pencils and rubber bands, while Nick Mason attempted to manipulate the sound of banging pots and pans so they would resemble snare drums. Initially, Waters was very keen on the project and defended Floyd's unorthodox direction, saying, "I've always felt that the differentiation between a sound effect and music is a load of shit. Whether you make a sound on a guitar or a water tap is irrelevant. Our use of bottles, knives, and falling axes is turning into a really nice piece." Weeks were spent with engineer Alan Parsons at Abbey Road creating percussive rhythms by scraping brooms on the floor, chopping wood with an axe, and twanging rubber bands. A frustrated Parsons eventually admitted, "We spent something like 4 weeks in the studio and came away with no more than 1.5 minutes of music." By the end of the year, even Waters, who by this time was calling the majority of the shots in the studio, had second thoughts about Household Objects. Originally, the band thought the idea of a concept album made up of found noises was an interesting direction, but as drummer Nick Mason has since suggested, the experiment was a delaying tactic in the absence of any new songs. The 4 weeks' worth of sounds were recorded and cataloged, but ultimately the sessions were a wasted effort, a concept too eccentric even for the experimentalist Pink Floyd. The initial sessions didn't go entirely to waste though. At least one track from these sessions were used in Wish You Were Here. The eerie drones heard on the first song of the album, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, were created during Household Objects recording sessions by fingers skimming around the rims of wine glasses, each filled with varying amounts of liquids to create different notes. The aborted Household Objects sessions of 1973 weren't the first time Pink Floyd had tried to use sound effects in place of conventional instruments. The germ of the idea began in 1969, when the band was performing a new piece called Work that involved sawing wood and boiling kettles on stage. Then, in 1970, Pink Floyd released Atom Heart Mother, an album that included the track Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast, which featured the sounds of frying eggs and bacon, milk being poured over Rice Krispies, and finally ending with the hypnotic sound of a dripping tap. The concept of found sounds with Household Objects was revisited again with their 6th studio album, Metal. In a 2006 interview, John Leckie, a tape operator assigned to Floyd's Metal sessions, said the band were making chords up from the tapping of beer bottles, tearing newspapers to get rhythm, and letting off aerosol cans to get a hi-hat sound. Leckie also said that Floyd's Metal sessions would often begin in the afternoon and end early the next morning. during which time nothing would get done. There was no record company contact whatsoever, except when their label manager would show up every now and then with a couple bottles of wine and a couple of joints. After several frustrating months in the studio of revisiting household objects, trying to find the right tones from twanging rubber bands and ripping newspapers, the band was finally ready to walk away from the idea of an album without instruments. David Gilmour called the sessions rather unsatisfying. Keyboardist Richard Wright remembered sitting down with Roger Waters and saying it was insane. Eventually, the band agreed a new direction was needed, and they abandoned household objects once and for all. With Roger Waters firmly in the driver's seat at this point of Pink Floyd's existence, the bassist conceived the idea of making an album without absence, a theme he noticed surrounding him. The absence of Syd Barrett, the absence of harmony between he and his soon-to-be ex-wife, and what he saw as the absence of commitment from his bandmates. Waters felt these feelings of loneliness and the theme of missing those close to you would make a strong album concept. The album soon, fittingly, would become known as Wish You Were Here. By now, everyone knows the legend of Syd Barrett. He was a founding member of Pink Floyd, the lead singer, chief songwriter, and with all things considered, the face of the band. But due to a combination of health issues, it's speculated that he suffered from schizophrenia and heavy psychedelic drug use, mostly LSD. Barrett was let go from the band on April 6, 1968, after months of trying to work around his erratic behavior. While he recorded 2 solo albums, The Madcap Laughs and Barrett, at the assistance of his record label EMI and Harvest Records, and made a handful of live appearances, Barrett mostly stayed out of the public eye. Then on June 5, 1975, while Floyd was putting together the final touches of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Barrett turned up uninvited to Abbey Road to the shock of everyone. Keyboardist Richard Wright retold the story. Roger was there, and he was sitting at the desk, and I came in and saw this guy sitting behind him. Huge, bald, fat guy. I thought, he looks a bit strange. And we worked for about 10 minutes, and this guy kept on getting up, brushing his teeth, and then sitting, doing really weird things, but keeping quiet. After 45 minutes, Wright suddenly realized it was Syd. He came in as they were doing the vocals on Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which was basically about Syd. Although he was only 29 years old, Barrett had the appearance of a disheveled, middle-aged man. After several years of isolation, the once beautiful and charming Barrett had become, as Waters later described, a great, fat, bald, mad person. Immediately after the Crazy Diamond session, Barrett attended the engagement party held for Gilmour's up-and-coming first wedding, but soon left without saying goodbye. None of the band members ever saw him again, apart from a chance run-in between Waters and Barrett a couple years later at a London department store. Shine On You Crazy Diamond was the magnum opus of Wish You Were Here, if not Pink Floyd's entire career. It's considered the band's greatest song by Rolling Stone, Billboard, and the readers of Ranker. The 9-part epic lasts a total of 26 minutes and keeps with the theme of absence and loss, and was intended to be a side-long composition. Instead, Roger Waters split the song into 2 sections and used them to bookend the album, filling the remainder of the record with new material that was more relevant to the album's theme of absence. The inner band friction and frustration that put an end to the household objects didn't disappear when Floyd put down the rubber bands and wine glasses and opted for Roger Waters' theme of absence and isolation. But the increasingly dominant voice of Roger Waters, who by this time was the de facto leader of Pink Floyd, began irritating the other band members, especially David Gilmour. 2 of Gilmour's songs were dropped and replaced with more of Waters' absence theme tracks after Nick Mason and Richard Wright outvoted Gilmour. Tensions worsened when it came time for Waters to sing Have a Cigar. Waters was having a difficult time getting the song right, so their friend Roy Harper was drafted in to sing. The way the story goes, Harper was recording his album HQ in Studio 2 of Abbey Road at the same time Pink Floyd was working in Studio 3. Depending on who's telling the story, either Harper offered to sing the lead or members of Floyd asked him to sing the piece. This is how Waters remembers it. Roy was recording in the studio anyway, and I was in and out all the time. I can't remember who suggested it, maybe I did, probably hoping everyone would go on, "Oh, no Raj, you do it." But they didn't. They all went, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea." He did it, and everyone went, "Oh, terrific." So that's that. Wish You Were Here's iconic album art was made by Storm Thorgerson and his design studio Hypnosis, who created most of Pink Floyd's previous covers including A Saucer Full of Secrets, Uma Guma, and Atom Heart Mother. When he accompanied Pink Floyd on their 1974 tour that preceded the Wish You Were Here sessions, Thorgerson said he was able to give serious thought to the meaning of Waters' new lyrics. Thorgerson believed that the song Wish You Were Here weren't about Syd Barrett as much as they were about an unfulfilled presence. Roger Waters' lyrics and secondary theme of the pitfalls of the record industry, specifically Have a Cigar and Welcome to the Machine, inspired the cover image of a businessman shaking hands, one being on fire representing getting burned in a bad deal. The photo itself was shot at Warner Brothers Studios backlot in Burbank, California. with stuntman Danny Rogers and Ronnie Rondell, who was dressed in a hooded, fire-retardant suit covered by a business suit and a wig. Rondell was set on fire, and during the first take, the wind blew the flames into his face and singed his mustache. Although Wish You Were Here wasn't the mega hit that Dark Side of the Moon was, it still reached #1 on the charts in the US and UK and received incredibly positive reviews from critics. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here tour sold out night after night around the world, but by then, the band's direction and chemistry had changed completely. So what do you think about Pink Floyd's lost album? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other music stories of our weird history.